Shalom, everybody. Welcome to this special teaching on the true meaning of Christmas. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the traditions and some of the origins of the very famous, very common, very popular holiday known as Christmas. We're going to address some things that some people may find surprising. Perhaps there's things you've heard of before, or maybe you've never heard of them. I'd like to say right off the bat that everything we're going to be sharing in this video are things that are commonly known in historical circles and are published by vetted sources, such as the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Encyclopedia Judaica, and other sources. Everything, in other words, is grounded in actual historical fact. We're not going to bring in anything that is suspect in its understanding or what have you. I also want to say that I'd like to ask you to open your heart and open your mind and ask the Holy Spirit to speak to you right now, because what we're going to be sharing, I believe, is very, very important for everybody who loves God, and particularly those of us who believe in the Messiah. It's important for us to understand these truths because our enemy is very cunning and very deceptive, and it's very easy for him to speak to us and lead us astray, and he does that very subtly. A little bit of poison, a little bit of a time will eventually kill us, and we want to make sure that we staying clear of that. So I'm going to ask Hashem to just speak to you, to God to open your heart, open your mind, open your understanding, and I want to encourage you to take what I'm talking about in this video, to take it to the Lord, take it to God, ask Him about it. Seek Him out about it. Be open-minded. I also want to say that I've been there. I grew up celebrating Christmas. My family was not religious. Actually, but we celebrated Christmas. We had Christmas trees and Christmas presents. Christmas Eve, we did the wassailing. We did everything. And my wife and I, for the first part of our marriage, continued to celebrate Christmas. We did so, she and I being married, we did so with all of the traditional festivities. And of course, we incorporated, the celebration of the birth of Messiah as a part of that. And we very much believed in those early years that the cliche statement that Jesus is the reason for the season. We believe that. And so I want to encourage you that I've been there. I know what it's like. I know the fun of the holiday. I've participated in the fun of this holiday, so to speak. And many other people have felt the same way as you do. Perhaps you're watching this video because you want to learn more and you don't understand. You're kind of questioning some things. Many people have felt the same way that you do. They felt, as I once did, that everything was just perfectly fine. But what we discovered, what other people have discovered, is the truth. They dug a little deeper, went in and found out the origins of these things. And I can speak for myself and for other people that I know, they became appalled at these things and the fact that we were participating in them. And they made a decision to let it go. And in fact, it brought them and it brought me and my wife closer to God. And that's really the point. We want to come closer to God. We want to become closer to His truth and closer to who He is. It's not about getting rid of fun. It's not about being legalistic or hard-hearted. It's about truth and drawing close to Hashem. And so I want to encourage you that I've been there. Others have been there. We know what it's like. We know the nostalgia in the pool, and we totally get it. And so there was a point at time that, just like you right now watching this video, we learned these very things, and we were presented with a choice, and we made a choice for truth as opposed to tradition. So what's the bottom line of this video as we're going to get into some of these things? Let's take a deep breath. What's the bottom line? Here is the reality. And when I'm saying this, I want to emphasize that what I'm about to say is 100% biblical and historical fact. And that is this: Jesus is not the reason for this season. Let me say that again. Jesus is not in any way, shape, or form the reason for this season. Christmas is undoubtedly, irrefutably, a pagan holiday. Every historian, and frankly, most pastors, know this to be true. And more importantly, it is still a heathen holiday to this very day. Wiccans, witches, warlocks, aka pagans, still celebrate Christmas as their holiday. Still today. In fact, I have some quotes that I'm going to read you that I just acquired this week from from a Wiccan teaching page about this holiday from their own works, from their own writings. I'm going to share it with you so that you understand that this isn't just something that happened 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, but still today, there are people who celebrate this holiday as it's intended to be celebrated. So I want to begin with that first. Jesus is not the reason for the season. He has nothing to do with it. Now, there are objections that come up, and we're not going to deal with these objections in this video. I'm actually going to create another video to deal with these objections. The first objection is, does God really care? I mean, does he really care if we celebrate the holiday or not? Yes, it's a pagan holiday. By the end of this video, you'll see that that's absolutely true. But really, I'm not celebrating the holiday. I'm not worshiping whatever or not worshiping an idol. I'm actually focused on God. Is it okay? We're going to deal with that question. We're not going to deal with that question in this video. We're going to do it in a subsequent video because it's an important question. It's a good question. And we're going to look at it, not from my opinion, but we're going to look at it from the writings of the scripture. We also know, and everybody knows this again, that December 25th is absolutely, positively, without any doubt, not the birthday of the Messiah. That is absolutely true. In fact, everybody agrees that he was either born in the spring or the fall. Incidentally, the Bible doesn't tell us when he was born. It doesn't even really give us a date at all. And then we find out that the early believers did not celebrate the birth of the Messiah at all. In fact, the very first time that Christmas becomes a celebration of the birth of Messiah is actually on December 25th of the year 336. That's the 4th century. It's almost 400 years after Messiah. So for the first nearly 400 years, those who believe the Messiah are not celebrating his birth. There's no mention of it. There's nothing related to it. And there's good reason for that. One of the reasons is because Jews don't celebrate birthdays generally. Now, we're not opposed to celebrating birthdays, but in the context of a religious situation like this, that's not something that we do. So the second objection is usually, well, we all know it's not December 25th, but who cares? As long as we're celebrating the birth of Messiah, does it really matter on what date that we're celebrating? Again, I've already actually dealt with that objection. It's in a video that I did for one of the morning aliyahs, which I will attach to this video at the conclusion of it. But that question has the premise of we should be celebrating the birth of the Messiah. Because if we say, does it matter when we celebrate, as long as we celebrate? And that the premise of that is that we should be celebrating. And the fact of the matter is, we don't need to celebrate the birth of Messiah. It's not something that is mandated or we have to do or that we even really should do at all. It's okay to talk about the birth of Messiah as it's explained in the Gospels, but we don't need to have a celebration date. It's not imperative to have such a date. But I would add something else to that. If we were going to pick a date, we know it's not in the winter. Why not pick a date in the spring or pick a date in the fall? Why would we want to pick a date that is directly associated with a pagan deity? That seems a little kind of irresponsible, to say the very least. If we can pick any day and it doesn't really matter, why not pick a day in July or in August or November? Why pick a date that is directly related to a pagan deity? It sets us up. for idolatry. So that there's perhaps another answer to that objection. But again, that was in another video, and we'll leave that there. Here's what we need to know about the origins of Christmas. I'm going to be talking about the various traditions and customs of this holiday. And what we will see, and I think that people instinctively know this, these custom traditions have absolutely nothing to do with the Messiah whatsoever, who most people know as Jesus. That's how he's commonly referred to. They have nothing to do with him. You cannot find, and I challenge you to do so, but you cannot find not one custom or tradition or ceremony of Christmas that has anything to do with the Messiah at all. The fact that one can observe Christmas in every detail and yet remain completely devoid of any spirituality or religious context, that alone should be telling. I just told you that I grew up in a not a religious home. We did not have nativity scenes in our house. We were pretty much secular, actually. Yet we celebrated Christmas in all of its glory. And we did so, and we were able to do so without any reference to the, quote, birth of Christ. Now, this is impossible. It's impossible to do that with Jewish or AKA biblical festivals. How could anybody celebrate Hanukkah or Purim or Passover or any other biblical holiday, especially Yom Kippur and Rosh HaShanah, with a completely devoid notion of God? It's absolutely impossible. One cannot do that. But it's easy to do with Christmas. Now, this should be actually an obvious indication that, quote, Jesus is not the reason nor the source of the holiday. If he was, it would be impossible to celebrate without him because every element would speak about him. But they don't. In fact, they don't in any way at all. Literally, no tradition or custom of this holiday speaks or points to the Messiah in any way. Each of these elements teach, speak, or exhort faith in a false deity or, frankly, demonic spirits. Now, I don't say that haphazardly. I don't say that with anything other than just being honest. It's the truth. Let me share a few quotes from the Wicca teaching website that I referenced earlier. Right now is the winter solstice season. This is the Yule season. Wiccans, witches, and warlocks and other pagans right now are having the holiday of Christmas. Yes. And they mean it. This is what's written on their website. It says this. This is just a post from yesterday, I think. It says, today is Yule. It is celebrated on the winter solstice, which is the longest night of the year. But after this night, the night will start to get shorter and the days grow longer. It is a celebration of the rebirth of the sun god. Now, ancient people, it says, were hunters and farmers and spent most of their time outdoors. The seasons and weather played a very important part in their lives. Because of this, they write, many people had a great reverence for the worship of the sun. The Norsemen saw the sun as a wheel that changed the seasons. It was from the word for wheel that we get the word Yule, Haul, or Jol. On Yule, we celebrate the return of the waxing sun. In Wicca, it says, this is the birth of the sun god, who has many names: Kranos, Pan, the Oak King, Apollo, Sol, Freyr, Horus, Mithra, the Horn God, or the Lord of Light. The goddess, who, by the way, is a virgin in the story, gives birth to this sun god on this very night. And by doing this, she sacrifices herself to give light to the Lord of Light to ensure the earth's survival. As it turns out, and we'll find out here in a minute, December 25th is actually the literal birthday of this Lord of Light, who is the sun god, who has been born every year by this virgin goddess. This is literally what we're celebrating. It has nothing to do with the Messiah in any way, shape, or form. It goes on to say this. In ancient traditional Yule, it was celebrated with a large fire where townsfolk and villagers would dedicate it to the sun god. They would fill their homes with evergreens and an evergreen tree to show that even though the land is barren and dead, life still flourishes. They would decorate the tree of their home with shiny objects to encourage the sun god to shine. So bringing in a tree, a Christmas tree, into your home was all to give praise to the sun god. To decorate it was to give more glory to the sun god. Some say, by the way, that also bringing in these symbols would actually bring in other spirits. As it says here, we use holly and mistletoe on Yule as the plants flourish in the winter. We use them as a symbol to the fertility gods and the fertility goddesses. So by deck the halls with boughs of holly, the reason that was done during this season of winter solstice was to attract the spirits of fertility into the home. Some suggest that's why we actually kiss under the mistletoe, was actually to invite the spirit of fertility. The red berries, it says here, of the holly represent the blood of the goddess, and the white berries of the mistletoe, pardon the reference here, but I just want to be completely honest. The white berries of the mistletoe represent the semen of the god and ensure a healthy spring and a harvest to come. So again, we're talking here about fertility. This is what these berries are said to represent, and it's why mistletoe specifically has a connection to this holiday, and it goes back to antiquity. So the article continues and says, fill your Yule altar with fruit, nuts, winter seasonal fare such as fallen leaves, fallen tree branches, acorns, evergreens, and also anything bright and shiny. Ladies and gentlemen, can I just tell you that growing up, that's exactly what we would do. Inexplicably, during this time of the year, that was a time of the year where our table was set through the entire holiday with nuts and fruits and other things of that nature. And I remember that distinctly as a kid. That was a time we had actually a nutcracker, not like the dance, but we had a literal nutcracker on the table, and we would sit and crack nuts and drink hot chocolates and those kinds of things. And I read about this because that's a tradition from the old winter solstice worship. It all has to do with the sun god. So it goes on to say that by doing so, we ensure a year of goodness, a year of plenty. This is where it goes on to talk about nutmeg and cinnamon and cloves, though, you know, those spices and fragrances that are so associated with this time of year, cinnamon and cloves. It all goes back to the worship of the sun god. It says the winter solstice has been celebrated by many ancient cultures, one of the most famous being Saturnalia, which is actually, ladies and gentlemen, the origin of Christmas itself, the Roman holiday of Saturnalia. It says the ancient Romans held a festival to celebrate the rebirth of the year, and Saturnalia ran for 7 days from December 17th to the 23rd. Saturnalia, by the way, is the festival that was the worship of the Roman god Saturn, and it was commonly referred to as the carnival. People were very merry, and it was almost like a Mardi Gras. In fact, in England, later when this holiday got to England actually treated it like a Mardi Gras with the decadence and the drunkenness and those kinds of things. And in fact, you may not believe this, but it's true. Saturnalia was literally called, are you ready for this? Literally the most wonderful time of the year. I'm not kidding you. That is literally what it was called. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Sound familiar? Of course it does, because it goes all the way back to ancient Rome. Now, during this holiday, all ordinary rules were off. Men dressed as women and masters dressed as servants. The servants were given lavish gifts and they were waited on by their masters and even allowed to be insolent to their masters. The festival also involved decorating houses with greenery, lighting candles, holding processions, and of course, giving gifts. A Saturnalia tree, it says here on the Wiccan website, a Saturnalia tree would be the centerpiece of every home. Incidentally, I was reading about the Christmas tree and its origins, and it actually goes back all the way to Egypt. What all these things have in common, interestingly, when it talked about the tree, now they didn't use evergreens in Egypt, they used palms and so on, but in ancient times in Egypt, this occurred. But all of it, just like in the Gothic area, was related to the sun god. In Egypt, it was related to Ra. So in each case, the winter solstice is about the worship of the sun god, which was considered the greatest deity of all. So it goes on to say that Yule is a celebration of light and of the sun and its life-giving properties on the earth. It's a time to rejoice and be thankful for everything that we have and everything we're going to have in the new year. It's a time to contemplate the year that has gone and look forward to the future. Now, we're going to wrap it up with this. Again, what I'm reading to you, I just want to remind everybody, I'm reading to you from a Wiccan webpage about the holiday of Christmas or Yule that many people are celebrating in the name of Christ, but as it turns out, that's not where it's from. The winter solstice falls on the longest night of the year, and this has been celebrated in Great Britain, it says here, for 10,000 years or more, but we can debate about the time, but it's clearly before the time of Messiah. It says here that some of these celebrations, some of these traditions were introduced by the Druids, the Celtic priest, who would cut mistletoe that grew on the oak tree and give it out as a blessing. Oaks were seen as sacred, and the winter fruit of the mistletoe was a symbol of life in the dark winter months. So it says the pagan celebration of winter solstice, also known as Yule, is one of the oldest winter celebrations in the world. It was also the Druids, it says, who began the tradition of the Yule Log. The Celts thought that the sun stood still for 12 days in the middle of winter. During this time, a log was lit to conquer the darkness, banish the evil spirits, and bring good luck for everybody. To make a Yule log, you would cut it into 12 pieces, and each piece represented the 12 months of the year. And you would burn a piece every day for 12 days. This is where we get the term the 12 days of Christmas. It comes from the Yule log, which was burned because of the winter solstice, because of the worship of the sun god. Many of the Yule customs, it says here, are still followed today by pagans and non-pagans. Now, for the third time, I emphasize, this is from the Wiccan teaching website. And this is what they write in conclusion of this article. They have been talking about all these pagan things I've just mentioned. These have been incorporated into Christian and secular celebrations of Christmas. Today, we welcome back the Lord of Light. Blessed Yule to all. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the true meaning of Christmas. The problem is, when we celebrate Christmas, we are in fact celebrating all of these things to a pagan deity. That's the reality. People are surprised to find out that Christmas in the United States did not become a holiday until about 1850. Prior to that, there really was no Christmas in America at all. In fact, it had been at one point outlawed in America. And it had been at one point actually outlawed in England for these very reasons, because the leaders who back in those days were more orthodox, you might say, more Reformation Protestant Christians understood that Christmas was pagan and that every single bit of its celebration was pagan and filled with superstition. And so as a result, they actually literally outlawed it. And so in the 1850s, Christmas began to be introduced to the American culture, and it began more in the North, and primarily with German immigrants who would set up Christmas trees in their home because, again, the Christmas tree comes from more of a Nordic or Viking, a Germanic pagan cult, and so they brought that over from Old England. By 1860, Christmas is starting to become more and more observed in the United States, but not entirely. In fact, the Rebbetzin at one point for many years was the docent in charge of an 1860s farmstead at a historical park in Dallas. And the curator of that park told her that during this time of the year, not to set up a Christmas tree or any Christmas decorations at the 1860s farmstead, because he pointed out that at that time in America, it was rare for anybody to celebrate Christmas, particularly in this part of the United States. So in our country, people think, man, people have been celebrating Christmas forever as it pertains to the Messiah. And the answer is that's not really true at all. In fact, I emphasize that nobody celebrated the supposed birth of the Messiah until the 4th century. And even then, the practice was limited to the Roman Empire. It was created, I should say, by the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Church Fathers. It spread to Egypt in 432. It didn't get to England until the late part, almost near the end of the 6th century. As I mentioned earlier, during the Middle Ages, Christmas was like a Mardi Gras. It was full of drunkenness and debauchery. Of course, it was like that in Rome too. A lot of bad things happen in Rome and so on. In England, as in ancient Rome, a beggar would be chosen, and this beggar was to be the king of Christmas, so to speak. He was supposed to represent Christmas. And this beggar was crowned, quote, Lord of Misrule. And one of his duties was to go kind of Christmas trick-or-treating, if you will, to all the wealthy people in his area and demand that they give him the best food and the best drink. If they didn't, then the people that were with him, his minions, would terrorize and harass the wealthy people. So the Lord of Misrule is the spirit of Christmas. Does the Bible give a date for the birth of Messiah? No. Did we celebrate it in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd centuries? No. Is Christmas about the Messiah? Not in any way, shape, or form. As I mentioned earlier, it was outlawed in Boston, specifically from 1659 to 1681. And the reason is because it was pagan and because it was full of superstition and it was irrelevant to the Bible. There was no Christmas in America, I emphasize, until the middle of the 19th century. It began with the festival of Saturnalia, which was the worship of the Roman sun deity. And did I mention that one of the things that was done, one of the big festivities, was to sacrifice a pig on the altar and everybody partake of it? That's where the Christmas ham comes from. So, first of all, we shouldn't be eating pork anyway because God tells us not to. But pushing that aside for a second, when people sit down to eat the Christmas ham, where does that come from? It comes from the pig that was slaughtered on the altar in honor of the sun god. That's where it comes from. This was the birthday of the sun god himself. In Rome, the sun god is known as Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun, who was born on the 25th day of December. And interestingly, this was the patron deity of Constantine, who created Christianity. Also, Mithra is another name for this sun god, who is an ancient Iranian mythological god of light. The cult of this deity spread to Spain, to Great Britain, and to Germania. as early as 1400 BC. And then, of course, in worship, his worship rather spread to Persia. And Alexander the Great kind of helped get it throughout the entire Hellenistic world. In the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the cult of Mithra, carried and supported by the soldiers of the Roman Empire, became the chief rival to the developing Christian religion. And Mithra was thought to be the protector of the empire, a god of light, and he is associated with the Greek sun god and, of course, the Roman sun god Sol Invictus. What the early church fathers did is they figured out, hey, look, we're having a hard time winning this battle about false deities. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to declare that December 25th is the birthday of Jesus. And once we do that, everybody who's already celebrating, they don't have to change anything about what they're doing. They can keep celebrating exactly the way they're celebrating. It's just that we're going to change the name of the deity from Sol Invictus to Jesus Christ. Interestingly, when you look at ancient Roman lithographs of Sol Invictus, you see a picture of a man kind of holding his hand like this, and he has a radiant crown around his head, which is beams of and rays of the sun. And when you see ancient lithographs of Jesus Christ, you see a man holding his hand like this with rays coming out of his head. That's because they're the same lithographs. Sol Invictus was dubbed Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ became nothing more than a Roman sun god. And that's how this all began. Now I'm going to wrap it up with one final point here. Well, yes, I guess it'd be one final point, and that is about Santa Claus. In the midst of all of the things we have about Christmas, we have this mystical person named Santa Claus, and lovable Santa Claus with his little elves and a magic place up in the North Pole. Where does he come from? Where does Santa Claus originate? It's a very good question. And when you look up Santa Claus, you almost inevitably find that he's linked to one of the old, early Roman Catholic patron saints of the 4th century, Saint Nicholas of Myra, who was from the area around Turkey. Now, what's interesting about him is that the only similarity between this Saint Nicholas and Santa Claus is that, according to legend, Saint Nicholas would secretly give gifts to children. And that's about where the similarities end. That's it. There's nothing else. He gave gifts secretly to children. He did not live in a cold climate. He lived in Turkey, which is kind of quasi-deserty. That's it. He gave gifts to children, allegedly by secret. So I kind of marvel at why we associate Santa Claus with Saint Nicholas, because other than that, there's nothing that connects him. Interestingly, though, there is a lot of connection between Santa Claus and the Norse god Odin. And here they are from a website that still worships today the god Odin. It says, according to Norse mythology, Odin had a crew of industrious elves known as Odin's men. They were elves and dwarves, by the way, one of whom allegedly made the hammer for Thor, who is the son of Odin. Odin himself was said to live in a frozen world called Asgard, and often would clash with icy giants called frost giants. Similarly, especially during the winter solstice, Odin would fly around on an 8-legged horse named Selfnir. Some people say he had a magic sleigh. In most stories, Odin sat on the back of the horse, and in some stories, there were other animals who would pull his sleigh. And even the names of some of these mystical animals, like Santa has Donner and Blitzen. Well, interestingly, Odin's animals are named, and one of them was called Thunder and Lightning. they were all commanded by Odin and took him around during the winter solstice. He would fly around and he would have a list. Odin and Santa were both all knowing. They knew everything. They knew who was good and who was bad. Now, Odin would actually have a list that was, frankly, a naughty or nice list. And he would either dispense blessings upon people who were good, or he would dispense curses upon people who were bad. And like Santa Claus, he would deliver gifts, especially during the winter solstice. He would deliver gifts to his people. In fact, Odin has many names. Sometimes he's called Yule Father or Jolafor, or sometimes he's known as Father Christmas in the Norse religion. And this is just me. I should also mention, by the way, Santa Claus is depicted as we're having a white beard. The early depictions of Santa Claus before the red suit. The red suit came from Coca-Cola, but prior to that, he was portrayed in writings or in pictures as a woodsman, a long white beard with a cloak. He was always in a frozen environment or a snowy environment. Saint Nicholas was not in a frozen environment. He was in the desert, basically. But Odin was. And Odin was also depicted the same way, a long coat, usually like a woodsman, and so on. So Santa Claus, ladies and gentlemen, is Odin. That's who that is, not Saint Nicholas. He's actually Odin. Here's the problem. We teach our children to basically ask Santa Claus for stuff. And we teach our children to behave so that they can please Santa Claus, so that he will bless them with their requests. This is, in effect, praying to Santa Claus. Now, Santa Claus is, as I'm telling you, is actually Odin, the Norse god from this cult, this pagan cult. That's terrifying that we're actually teaching children to pray to the god Odin, the false deity, and so on. But let's suppose for a moment that we want to forget about him being Odin. Let's just suppose that either he's a made-up person with just a cute little story, or maybe he is Saint Nicholas, and that's who this is. Well, it's just as bad. We're teaching children to pray and ask a mystical being, not God, not praying them to ask God for gifts or submit their request to God. We're actually asking our children to pray to a mystical being. Or maybe we're asking them to pray to a human being, to just a man, a Roman Catholic monk who lived in the 4th century. We're asking them to pray to the dead now, to pray to a human being who's dead and had been dead for hundreds of years. No, that's terrifying. And then to make matters worse, we're doing this during their most impressionable years. And if that weren't bad enough, right about the time when they're the most impressionable, we tell them it was all a sham and make-believe. But we expect them to believe in the Messiah and believe in a God they've never seen. Now, are we setting our children up for failure? Oh, you say it's all good fun. The question is it? Is it good fun? Or are we severely damaging our children's faith and spirit by leading them into, no matter how you look at it, whether it's Odin or a make-believe Santa Claus or a human being, we're leading them down a very dangerous path that the Bible tells us over and over again, do not do this. I mean, it's terrible. And then we're telling them, oh, it was just all make-believe. I know we really tricked you out and everything, but it's all make-believe. But guess what? God is real, really. We talked about mistletoe. There's other things we could say about that, but I want to leave us with this. If everything I told you is not bad enough, then I want you to investigate the Christmas Krampus, which I'm going to put in the description of this video. Krampus was actually the counterpart to Santa Claus, to Saint Nicholas in ancient times. Whereas this Santa Claus would come and bless children who were good and give them gifts, he was accompanied, and I want to emphasize accompanied, by Krampus, who was a half goat, half man demon who would, and I apologize for the scariness of what I'm about to say, but he would accompany Santa Claus. And if the child was naughty, then Krampus would either beat them with a stick, consume them, or drag them to hell. There's still Krampus celebrations today during Christmas in the parts of the world where all of this mess originated. You say, well, we don't do that, Rabbi. We don't have Krampus celebrations as a part of our Christmas. And that's good. But I would tell you, it doesn't really matter because it's all part of the same package. Now, again, I've been right where you are. I've celebrated all this. I have worn the red Christmas hat. My wife, I didn't mention this, but the Rebbe seen way back in our first early years of marriage, she's a consummate decorator, and she actually worked for a Christmas showroom that was, I would say, at least 1,500 square feet at the World Trade Center in Dallas. And she would decorate Christmas trees and all of these things. And I would come in on the weekends and help her do this. I say that for your comfort to know that when I say that we used to do this, we used to really be in this. But once we found out what we were doing, that if we want to just be honest with ourselves, we were in a big showroom, sometimes in our house, of course, decorating a tree with a bunch of decorations. We were actually decorating an idol. That's the reality check. We were decorating an idol. Again, in another video, I'm going to answer the question, does God care? I think you know the answer, but I'll answer it for you in another video. So we were decorating an idol, and we were doing it all in the name of idolatry, and none of it had anything to do with the Messiah. None of it. Once we found that out, we had to make a choice. And our choice was to throw away the mess and draw closer to God. And I pray that's the choice that you make as a result of this video and perhaps other things that you might see about this holiday of Christmas. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the true meaning of Christmas. I pray that it has been enlightening for you. I pray that it's been a blessing to you. More importantly, I pray that you will take everything I've said and talk to Hashem about it. Talk to God about it. Ask him to bring down the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, into your life and help you to discern what this all means. And I pray that you will do that sincerely. God bless you. Look forward to seeing you in our next video. Until then, have a great evening.